November 2004. 3 weeks before the world would lose one of metal's greatest guitarists, Dimebag Darrell Abbott sent a package to Ace Frehley's home in Westchester County, New York. Inside was a gift that would haunt Ace for the rest of his life. Not because of what it was, but because of what was written on the note tucked inside. A note that Ace has never fully shared with anyone. A note that predicted something neither man wanted to believe could happen. If you've never heard this story, and you want to understand the depth of connection between rock's greatest guitarists across generations, hit that subscribe button now. This is the kind of story that only gets told once. Most people don't know that Ace Frehley and Dimebag Darrell had any relationship at all. They existed in different worlds, different eras, different subgenres of heavy music. Ace was the space-suited guitar hero of 70s arena rock, the architect of Kiss's sonic identity. Dimebag was the groove metal revolutionary of Pantera, the man who redefined what heavy guitar could sound like in the 90s. Their paths shouldn't have crossed in any meaningful way. But music has a way of creating bonds that transcend time, geography, and genre. They first met in 1992 at a guitar clinic in Dallas, Texas. Ace was there promoting his return to music after years of battling addiction and personal demons. Dimebag was riding high with Pantera's breakthrough album Vulgar Display of Power, establishing himself as the most exciting guitarist in metal. The clinic was supposed to be Ace's show, but Dimebag showed up unannounced, carrying his signature Dean ML guitar with its lightning bolt finish, just wanting to meet one of his childhood heroes. What happened during that first meeting would define their relationship for the next 12 years. After the official clinic ended, after the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, the two guitarists sat on the edge of the stage and talked for nearly 3 hours. Not about technique or equipment, though those topics came up. They talked about the weight of being known for a specific sound, about the pressure of fan expectations, about the loneliness that comes with being the guitar player in a band where everyone knows your style but nobody really knows you. Dimebag confessed something to Ace that night that he rarely admitted publicly. Despite all of Pantera's success, despite being hailed as metal's new guitar god, he still felt like that kid from Arlington, Texas, trying to live up to his heroes. And Ace Frehley was at the top of that list. Ace saw something in Dimebag that reminded him of himself at that age. The raw talent, yes, but also the vulnerability hidden behind the bravado. The need to be more than just a guitar player, to be an artist, to leave something behind that mattered. Before they parted that night, they exchanged private phone numbers, not management numbers, not publicist contacts. Their actual home phone, numbers, the kind you only give to people you trust. Over the following 12 years, Ace and Dimebag maintained a friendship that almost nobody in the music industry knew existed. They would call each other late at night, during the lonely hours on tour when the adrenaline from the show had worn off, but sleep wouldn't come. They'd talk about new guitar ideas, about struggles with their respective bands, about life beyond music. Dimebag would send Ace bootleg recordings of Pantera rehearsals, asking for feedback on new riffs. Ace would share rough demos of solo material he was working on, getting Dimebag's opinion before anyone else heard it. The friendship deepened in 2000 when Ace was going through one of the darkest periods of his life. His marriage was falling apart, his finances were a mess, and the music industry had largely moved on from the kind of rock he'd helped create. One particularly bad night in March of that year, Ace called Dimebag at 2 a.m, not really knowing what he needed, but knowing he needed to talk to someone who would understand. Dimebag answered on the second ring, despite being in the middle of recording Pantera's Reinventing the Steel album. He stayed on the phone for over an hour, not offering platitudes or easy answers, just listening and occasionally sharing his own struggles with the changing metal landscape. What Dimebag told Ace that night became a touchstone for both of them. He said that the music they created wasn't just notes and rhythms. It was a piece of their souls that would outlive both of them. That even when the industry forgot, even when trends changed and newer guitarists came along, the emotional truth in what they'd created would endure. It was the kind of conversation that only happens between artists who truly understand the cost of their craft. After that night, something shifted in their friendship. It became less about guitar talk and more about life philosophy, about legacy, about what it meant to be an artist in a world that increasingly valued image over substance. They started sending each other books, poetry, and philosophical writings. Dimebag introduced Ace to some of the metaphysical texts he'd been exploring. Ace shared his growing interest in UFOs and ancient mysteries. To outsiders, these interests might have seemed random or eccentric, but to each other, they represented a search for meaning beyond the stage lights and guitar solos. In early November 2004, Ace was at his home in Westchester County, working on material for what would eventually become his Anomaly album. He was in a creative space, feeling more connected to his music than he had in years. The doorbell rang mid-afternoon, and his assistant brought in a package. Plain brown shipping box, no return address, but the handwriting on the label was immediately recognizable. Dimebag's distinctive scrawl, letters leaning hard to the right like they were being pushed by a strong wind. Ace opened the package carefully, sensing that whatever was inside mattered. The first thing he saw was a guitar pick, but not just any pick. It was one of Dimebag's signature Dunlop picks, the .073mm gauge he used exclusively, but this one had been custom-made. On one side was Dimebag's logo. On the other side, hand-engraved in tiny letters, were the words, "For the Space Ace from Dime." The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Someone had spent serious time and money creating this single pick. Beneath the pick, wrapped in tissue paper, was a photograph. The image showed Dimebag as a teenager, maybe 16 or 17 years old, standing in what looked like his childhood bedroom. The walls were covered with posters, and right in the center, in a place of prominence, was a massive Kiss Alive poster with Ace Frehley in mid-solo, his Les Paul catching the stage lights. Young Dimebag was pointing at the poster with one hand while holding his first serious guitar with the other, a huge smile on his face. The photo was candid, slightly out of focus, the kind of snapshot that captures a genuine moment rather than a posed image. But it was what came next that stopped Ace cold. A handwritten letter, 3 pages on yellow legal paper, covered in Dimebag's familiar handwriting. The letter started casually enough, talking about new music Pantera was working on, some tour dates coming up, general musician talk. But the tone shifted in the second page, became more reflective, almost elegiac. Dimebag wrote about how that teenage kid in the photo had dreamed of becoming a guitarist good enough to share a stage with Ace Frehley someday. How every lick he learned, every riff he created, was built on a foundation that guitarists like Ace had constructed. The third page of the letter was where things got strange, where the words took on a quality that Ace couldn't quite shake. Dimebag wrote about legacy and mortality, about how guitarists live on through the music they create and the players they inspire. He wrote about a recurring dream he'd been having, where he was performing on a stage that kept getting smaller and smaller, the crowd getting closer and closer, until there was no separation between performer and audience. He described the dream as both terrifying and beautiful, a complete merging of artist and art. Then came the sentence that would haunt Ace forever. Dimebag wrote in his distinctive slanted handwriting, "If something ever happens and I can't tell you this in person, I need you to know that you saved my life more times than you realize. Not with advice or wisdom, just by existing, by proving that a guitarist could be real and weird and himself and still create magic. Keep that pick close, brother. It's got both our spirits in it now." Ace read that sentence 3 times, trying to understand the weight behind it. It felt like more than sentiment, more than the kind of thing musicians say to each other after a few drinks. It felt like a goodbye disguised as a thank you. But that didn't make sense. Dimebag was 38 years old in his prime, with decades of music still ahead of him. Ace shook off the uneasy feeling and put the letter in his desk drawer, next to other important correspondence he wanted to keep safe. December 8th, 2004. Ace was in his home studio, working on a guitar part, when his phone started ringing incessantly. First his manager, then his publicist, then musician friends he hadn't heard from in months. The news came in fragments, each call adding another horrible detail. Shooting, Columbus, Ohio, Alrosa Villa nightclub, damage plan show, Dimebag, gone. The timeline was horrific. Nathan Gale, a deranged fan, had jumped onto the stage during Damage Plan's opening song and shot Dimebag multiple times at point-blank range. The guitarist died instantly, slumped over his beloved Dean guitar, the same lightning bolt finish he'd been carrying since that first meeting with Ace in Dallas. 3 other people were killed before police ended the rampage. The metal world went into shock. Tributes poured in from every corner of the music industry. But Ace couldn't process any of it yet. He went to his desk and pulled out the letter. Read it again. "If something ever happens, and I can't tell you this in person." 3 weeks. Dimebag had sent that package just 3 weeks before his murder. Had he known? Not the specifics, obviously, but had he sensed something? Or was it just the kind of morbid coincidence that makes you question whether reality operates on rules we don't fully understand? Ace held the custom guitar pick in his hand, feeling the engraved letters under his thumb. The physical object suddenly felt impossibly heavy, weighted with meaning it hadn't carried before. This wasn't just a gift from a friend. It was a last testament, a final message from someone who wouldn't get to deliver any more messages. The pick that was supposed to be a symbol of mutual respect and artistic brotherhood had transformed into a memorial. Dimebag's funeral was held in Dallas on December 14th. Thousands of fans lined the streets. Musicians from across the metal and rock spectrum came to pay respects. Eddie Van Halen placed his black and yellow striped guitar in Dimebag's casket, a gesture so profound that it reduced grown men to tears. The ceremony was a celebration of Dimebag's life, his music, his impact on heavy metal culture. But beneath the celebration was a current of shock and anger. Why did it have to end this way? Why was such talent, such life, cut down by senseless violence? Ace attended the funeral quietly, staying toward the back, not wanting to draw attention. This wasn't about him or his grief. This was about Dimebag and the metal community's loss. But several people who'd been close to Dimebag sought Ace out, mentioning that Dime had talked about him often, had considered him a true friend and mentor. One of Dimebag's guitar techs pulled Ace aside and mentioned that Dime had been working on that custom pick for months, had sent the design back to the manufacturer 3 times until it was perfect. The text said Dimebag had been adamant about getting it to Ace before the end of the year, though he never explained why the timing mattered so much. After the service, Ace found a quiet moment at the reception. He stood near a display of Dimebag's guitars, the Dean MLs that had created some of metal's most iconic sounds, and he thought about that letter. About the dream Dimebag had described, the stage getting smaller, the crowd closing in. Had it been a premonition? Or was Ace's grieving mind finding patterns where none existed, trying to make sense of something that would never make sense? In the years following Dimebag's death, Ace Frehley kept that custom guitar pick with him constantly. Not in a guitar case or a drawer, but in his pocket, every single day. He would reach for it during difficult moments, running his thumb over the engraved words, feeling the connection to a friend who'd been taken too soon. The pick became more than a memorial object. It became a reminder of why creating music mattered, why the connections between musicians transcended the commercial machinery of the industry. Ace started incorporating elements of Dimebag's approach into his own playing. Not stylistically, they were too different for that, but philosophically. Dimebag had played with a fearlessness, a willingness to be heavy and groovy and technical and emotional all at once, never worried about whether it fit neatly into genre expectations. Ace began approaching his solo work with that same freedom, particularly on his Anomaly album released in 2009. Songs like Foxy and Free and Space Bear showed a guitarist unafraid to blend classic rock sensibilities with heavier, more aggressive tones. It was Ace's music, undeniably, but informed by the lessons he'd learned from his friendship with Dimebag. In interviews over the following years, Ace rarely mentioned the friendship or the gift. When he did, he kept it brief, never going into detail about the letter or its eerily prescient tone. The full story remained private, locked away with other experiences too personal to commodify for public consumption. But musicians who knew both Ace and Dimebag understood that something profound had existed between them, a bond that death hadn't severed, but had, in some ways, intensified. The story of Dimebag's final gift to Ace Frehley reveals something essential about how musical influence really works. It's not always direct, not always obvious. Dimebag didn't sound like Ace Frehley. Pantera's brutal groove metal bore no surface resemblance to Kiss's anthemic arena rock. But beneath the stylistic differences was a shared commitment to authenticity, to creating music that came from a real place emotionally rather than from market research or trend chasing. When Dimebag sent that package, he was acknowledging a debt that most people wouldn't have recognized. Ace Frehley, through his work with Kiss and his solo material, had helped create a template for what a rock guitarist could be, flamboyant but genuine, technically skilled but emotionally accessible, larger than life on stage but vulnerable and human off stage. Dimebag had absorbed those lessons, consciously or unconsciously, and built his own approach on that foundation. The gift was his way of saying that none of his success existed in isolation, that he was part of a lineage of guitarists who learned from and supported each other across generational and stylistic divides. The photograph of teenage Dimebag pointing at the Ace Frehley poster was evidence of that connection at its purest. Before the fame, before the Grammy nominations and the gold records, before Pantera became one of the biggest metal bands in the world, there was just a kid in Texas who loved the way Ace Frehley made a guitar sing. That kid never forgot where his passion started, never lost sight of who inspired him to pick up the instrument in the first place. And when success came, when he became Dimebag Darrell, the metal guitar god, he made sure to honor that inspiration in the most personal way possible. Today, Ace Frehley is in his 70s, still performing, still creating, still pushing himself as a guitarist and artist. The custom pick from Dimebag remains in his possession, though he no longer carries it daily. It stays in a special place in his home studio now, alongside other meaningful objects from his decades in music. But the influence of that friendship, the lessons learned from Dimebag's approach to music and life, those remain active in Ace's work. In recent interviews, when asked about guitarists who influenced him later in his career, Ace has occasionally mentioned Dimebag. Not in great detail, respecting the privacy of their friendship, but acknowledging that the younger guitarist taught him as much as he might have taught Dimebag. That mutual exchange, that cross-generational dialogue between artists, represents the best of what music can be when ego and competition step aside and genuine respect takes over. The letter that came with the pick, the one Ace has never fully shared publicly, reportedly contains more than just the prescient passages about legacy and mortality. Friends who've seen it say there are sections about specific musical ideas, riffs, and progressions that Dimebag wanted Ace to hear, possibly to develop or incorporate into his own music. There's apparently a section about the nature of creativity itself, about how the best musical ideas feel less like inventions and more like discoveries, as if the music already exists somewhere, and the guitarist's job is just to find it and bring it into the physical world. Whether Ace will ever share that letter in full remains to be seen. It's his decision to make, his private correspondence with a friend who's gone. But the existence of the letter and the gift that accompanied it stands as testimony to a friendship that enriched both men's lives and, by extension, enriched the musical landscape they both inhabited. There's a story Ace told once, late at night after a show in Texas, to a small group of musicians and friends. He was holding the pick, turning it over in his fingers under the dressing room lights. He said that sometimes, when he's working on a particularly difficult piece of music, when he's stuck and can't find the right notes or the right feel, he'll take out Dimebag's pick and just hold it for a moment. And more often than not, the solution to whatever musical problem he's wrestling with will suddenly become clear. He doesn't think it's literally Dimebag's ghost guiding his fingers or whispering ideas into his ear. Ace is too pragmatic for that kind of magical thinking. But he does believe that the pick serves as a physical reminder of what Dimebag represented: fearlessness in creativity, authenticity in expression, and the understanding that music is bigger than any individual musician. Holding the pick reconnects Ace to those principles, clears away the noise and the pressure, and lets him access the part of himself that just wants to make sounds that move people. In that sense, Dimebag's gift achieved exactly what he intended. It became a talisman, yes, but not a magical one. A psychological anchor that reminds Ace of why he became a guitarist in the first place, of the long lineage of players he's part of the responsibility to honor that lineage by continuing to create honestly and fearlessly. The gift that carried a ghost isn't haunted by something supernatural. It's infused with the very real presence of a friendship that transcended death because it was built on something more durable than physical proximity or frequent contact. It was built on mutual respect, artistic understanding, and the recognition that both men were engaged in the same essential human endeavor, trying to create beauty and meaning in a chaotic world. 20 years after Dimebag's death, certain questions about that final gift remain unanswered. Did Dimebag have some intuition about his mortality, some sense that he needed to express certain things while he still could? Or was the timing purely coincidental, the letter's prophetic quality existing only in retrospect, assigned by grieving minds looking for meaning in tragedy? We'll never know for certain. What we do know is that the gift mattered deeply to Ace Frehley, altered his approach to music and life, and stands as a beautiful example of how artists support and influence each other across the artificial boundaries of genre and generation. In a music industry often characterized by competition, ego, and commercial calculation, the Ace Frehley and Dimebag Darrell friendship represented something purer. Two guitarists recognizing kindred spirits in each other and choosing to nurture that connection away from public view for no reason other than it enriched their lives. The pick with both their spirits engraved in it, as Dimebag wrote, continues to exist. A small physical object carrying enormous emotional weight. A reminder that the best gifts aren't always the most expensive or elaborate. Sometimes the most meaningful gift is simply the acknowledgement of influence, the recognition of impact, the willingness to say, "You mattered to my journey," while there's still time to say it. Ace Frehley keeps playing, keeps creating, keeps carrying forward the lessons learned from that unlikely friendship. And somewhere in his music, in the spaces between notes where feeling lives, Dimebag Darrell's influence continues to resonate. A ghost in the guitar that reminds us all why music matters in the first place.